Hi everybody. It's a bit dark here. I think it might be a storm brewing or something like that. Anyway, just a quick one tonight. I'm a little bit late, but I'm going to read you chapter 5 only this evening. Some things have come up, so it's got a bit delayed, but I don't want to not read anything tonight. So let's read chapter 5, shall we? Of the Kraken's Curse. Chapter 5: The Insight. Inside the cottage, which seemed so small and desolate, opened out into a cavern of colours and textures. Brightly coloured silks and feathers hung from every window, and the walls were plastered with posters of colourful stars and explosions. In the corner, on a table, stood a cage with a small rainbow-coloured bird inside. The bird was quietly humming to itself. Arthur had been so caught up in the wondrous sights before him that he did not see Horrace approach him and begin to talk. "Well, well, well," he smiled. "Arthur Boston, what a surprise it is to see you. Of course, I knew you were coming even before you did, and so, in honour of the occasion, I prepared a few light treats. Danish?" He reached towards Arthur with a plate laden high with chocolate cream cakes. No, thank you," Arthur replied uneasily, not knowing what else to say. "Well, if you will not eat, please take a seat and we can talk. Let me pour you a sherry. Eat, drink, and be merry, that's what I always say." Arthur did not know whether he fitted in here or not. This was certainly not his scene. He much preferred his evening walks along the cliff tops. This man was far too brash, upfront, and bubbly for his liking. Throughout his long life, Horrace had obviously amassed a great collection with which he would now enjoy his retirement. Although the room was full to the brim with objects, Arthur's eyes were drawn to one particular treasure hanging in a glass cabinet above the fireplace. He was just about to ask what it was and where it had been found when Horrace started to speak again. "I just can't get over what a wonderful surprise it is to see you. I have been following your progress as much as I could since you arrived in the village, and may I be the first to congratulate you on your brave return. I never believed what the villagers said about you, and to aid your comfort, I thought it might be a good idea for me to keep them quiet as you made your way to see me." "Thank you. So it was you that stopped the time, was it?" Arthur rasped, returning to his usual tone of voice. "Well, I would be grateful if you would not do such a thing again. I am perfectly capable of dealing with my own problems, and to be honest, it caused me a great deal of discomfort." "Well, I was only trying to help keep you as low profile as possible. I thought that's what you wanted." "You see..." "Yes, I see. I'm sorry for my outburst, and I see now that you are only trying to help with this tricky situation." Arthur leaned forward and peered at the glass case mounted on the wall. Within it was a silver sword, as shiny as the day it was forged, and upon the blade was an inscription in a language that he did not understand. Horrace studied Arthur inquisitively, perhaps wondering what the lad could see in the sword, or whether he would be daring enough to ask about its presence here. "I see you have a great eye for detail," Horrace spoke calmly. "This sword has seen many pure hands at its hilt, and has always faced its fair share of victims. It is dangerous, Arthur." Arthur looked around in the direction of the door, and, not wanting to catch Horrace's eye, started to speak. "If you are in possession of this sword, then why have you not become a victim? It sounds as if the dangers have been passed from one owner to another, and each one in turn has suffered a horrible fate. Why has this not happened to you?" Horrace smiled at Arthur. It was a toothy grin that showed his age and almost made him look like a character from a faded comedy film. "You have a lot to learn," he laughed. "For you must understand that I did not receive that artifact from a relative of mine. I am, how should I say, looking after it for someone." Arthur thought this very strange indeed. If this sword did possess powers of a dangerous nature, then why had they not acted upon Horrace already? Or more to the point, why had they not acted upon Arthur the moment he entered the room? Maybe the sword was meant for someone else, and the powers would not start to work unless the sword was in this particular person's presence. Whatever the meaning was, it was still strange that Arthur had felt such a pull to the sword the moment he had stepped through the door. Horrace spoke again, and this time he sounded wise and virtuous. "Don't think I didn't notice you looking at that sword. You have been fascinated with it from the moment you stepped in the door, and why shouldn't you be? The answer I'm sure you will discover in due course." The last part ended in some sort of sing-song that was far from intentional. Arthur was somehow enjoying his time in the presence of Horrace. It was not the fact that he kept popping up with interesting comments every now and again, but it was his unusually vibrant and exciting personality. It was interesting because Horrace seemed to be everything that Arthur was not. "Of course, there is one thing we still need to discuss. Why you went away, and why you have now decided to come back," Horrace said. Arthur smiled, for he had the feeling that what he was about to say would not leave the room. "That is a very long story." "Well, I have a lot of time to spare," Horrace replied. "So when you are ready, I will make myself another cup of tea, and we will begin." Horrace got up and busied himself with a teapot, and Arthur began his story. "When I was a child, I lost my mother. Because of this, throughout my life, I have had to rely on my father's work and guidance. He was a good role model, a very good role model. He taught me the lessons of life and the rules of the game, so to speak. It is a credit to my father that I am the man I am today. Well, I went to school and I was taught the subjects that one must learn, and upon completion of my education I returned home to my father. It was strange for me to find my father sitting at the table with a solemn look on his face. Usually he would be beaming and ready with a hot cup of tea for my arrival, but today was different. It was as if he were preparing for the worst. I remember his words exactly. 'My son, now that you have completed your education, you are considered a man. Men are different from boys, and it is important to understand these differences. The skills that you have learnt over the years that I have taught you, and those that you have learnt at boarding school, will stand you in good stead for the future, and I hope you will do me proud in that big wide world. As you know, I am happy where I am in this house, with all my friends around me, and I intend to live out the rest of my life in this place. I've made some mistakes in my time. Some have been silly, and some I have regretted. The biggest of these happened when I was about your age, and now I will warn you, son, so that you do not make the same mistake that I did. My father was always a wise and virtuous man, and I took everything he said in good faith, as, after all, he was the one who taught me the main lessons of life. What happened next, though, surprised even me. My father reached under the table and produced a crimson bag with golden thread and bulging with gold coins. My eyes were wide open and my ears pricked, for I was about to learn the greatest lesson of my life so far. My son, I am sure you know what is in this bag. I have taken the liberty to remove a substantial amount from our savings from the local bank and bring them here today. Now listen carefully, son, for I am only going to say this once, and it may be the most important thing that you ever learn in your life so far. You must take this money and you must make your fortune. I never got a chance to do this, and the thing that I regret most of all is that. Believe me when I say terrible things are about to happen, and I do not want you to get tangled up in them. I love you, and so does your mother. I am sure she is looking down upon you now and smiling. Go, my son, and don't return until you have news of safety. That was the last time I saw my father. He handed over the bag of gold and helped me to pack my satchel. He gave me good food and made sure I had a place to stay. Then he opened the door, waved goodbye, and I was on my way. I thought it would be best to head for the city, as this was the place to earn money, or so my father had said. The city in question was London. When I arrived, I found the house where my father had set up bed and board for me, and I made myself at home. It was a cosy little dwelling in the back streets, far from the hustle and bustle of the main city walks. I found it enlightening, and to be living in such a busy city was great. It made me realise what I had missed when I was growing up on the coast. I worked out rather soon after my relocation that I needed a job, and I was going to have if I was going to have any chance of paying the rent and keeping a roof above my head. I would, of course, need funding. A few months later, when the money my father had given me had almost run out, I was ready for this, though, and now I was working at St. James's Place. I had always had an interest in money, and this job proved very enticing to me. I was to stay in this situation for several years, tending for myself and leading my day-to-day life in the city. That was until 3 weeks ago, when I received a letter. I was at work and dealing with a particularly tricky customer on the telephone when a clerk entered my office and handed me a letter with the Metropolitan Police watermark on it. Of course, I was extremely surprised to read about what was written on the pages. It was a letter from the National Directory of Missing People, and it told me that my father was missing, presumed dead. The bluntness of the words overcame me. Thoughts of my father filled my head, and I couldn't help but believe that I was never going to see him again. There was no uncertainty in my mind. I had to leave. I had to go, so I gathered my belongings and what was left of my earnings, and then I started my return to the Dorset coast. Arthur turned and looked at Horrace. He seemed lost in some other world, like he was actually listening and taking in all that he had been told. For a short time, Arthur felt important. He felt like someone actually cared about his story and was willing to help in the search for his father. "So what did you do upon your return to Poole Harbour?" Horrace spoke suddenly. "Well, I thought the best thing to do would be to visit my father's close friends. I was saddened to hear of the death of James Cinders, and so with nobody else left, I decided to visit Captain McCrae." Arthur's voice was strange, as if he found it hard to understand why the captain had been so unhelpful. "Ah, Captain McCrae," Horrace smiled. "His mind works in mysterious ways. He has definitely not been the same since... Well, let's just say I think that there is something going on. Luckily for you, I'm here to assist you in your quest, so to speak." "I thought that might be the case. My father always told me that you would never shy away from giving a helping hand." "Yes, your father gave me exact instructions before you left. He told me that if, God forbid, he was to die before you returned, I was to look after you and guide you as I saw fit." Arthur was hanging on Horrace's every word. He had always believed that his father would not desert him or leave without a trace, and so he was now discovering what he had always been sure of. Horrace continued, "Between you and I think your father knew exactly what was going to happen to him all along. He knew that he may not survive in the long run, and he asked me to make plans for your safety before he disappeared. It was always like your father to put others before himself." Arthur was amazed at what he had discovered, but he couldn't help feeling a little regret. If his father had known he was going to die, then why had he sent his only son away in the first place? All he knew was that his father had told him that terrible things were going to happen, and at that moment he seemed to be right in the midst of them. "I remember as a child," Arthur whispered, recalling old memories. "My father was reading to me from his diary. Tales of magical creatures of the land, sea, and of prophecies, and how low they would come one day, and how the creatures would rule over us all." "Ah," Horrace replied, looking very interested indeed. I think you've just discovered what you must do next. Am I right in saying that you have residence in the house that formerly belonged to the Reverend James Cinders?" "That would be correct," Arthur answered. "Well, in that case, I think your father left another clue for you before he disappeared. It's a clue that resides in that very house. You must go, Arthur. Find the diary that your father read to you as a child. I think it may be of great significance." Arthur smiled at Horrace, and instantly both men knew, as they stood up and headed for the door, that they were about to start unravelling this mystery. It was as if both were off on some long, adventurous quest, and as they bade goodbye to each other, they knew they would meet again soon. "There is one more thing you need to know, Arthur," Horrace shouted as his guest walked back across the field. "You must remember that your father gave his life for his homeland and the people he loved." And with that, Arthur was gone, through the gate, in the fence, and back up the road towards the village. Horrace closed the door and made himself another cup of tea, and couldn't stop himself wondering what Arthur would find in the pages of his father's old diary. George Boston had written in it just before he set off on that fateful night, and Horrace knew that at least one more shock was in store for Arthur before things started to get better. So that's chapter 5 of my novel, The Kraken's Curse. Not Walking on Cinders, we've done that one. This is The Kraken's Curse, chapter 5, and I'll be back tomorrow, and I will read 2 chapters tomorrow for Friday night, chapters 6 and 7. I hope you can join me then.